Now, they are among Africa's most majestic animals. Not long ago, southern white rhinos were on the brink of extinction. But this year, nearly 2,000 of them will begin making their way back into the wild. Now, they were once part of a private collection. A conservation agency is now releasing them to protected areas across the continent. DW correspondent Dianne Hawker reports now from South Africa.
This rhino calf doesn't know it, but it's part of one of the most significant rhino relocation projects ever undertaken. It's one of 89 southern white rhino calves being kept on a protected farm in South Africa's northwest province. Over the next few years, these animals could find themselves in Angola, Rwanda, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Malawi or Chad.
While it's ambitious, it's definitely exciting. I think the opportunity that it presents, not only for rhino as a species to de-risk rhino, but for the benefit of biodiversity, it definitely does motivate us to keep doing what we're doing.
Moving the babies will be light work. The real heavy lifting comes when the majority of the herd, over 1,900 rhinos, must be transported. Southern white rhino can weigh between 2 and 3 tons, and transporting one across borders can cost over $50,000 per rhino.
Sort of our take on it is that these rhino have a massive value, not necessarily talking about a financial value, but an ecological value that they need to play. In open areas, contributing to biodiversity, shaping landscapes. Rhino are often seen as sentinel species, so generally a clear indication if you've got a healthy ecosystem that's well managed and well protected, rhino flourish.
The rhinos will be relocated over a 10-year period, with some 200 rhinos being moved each year. The southern white rhino population is one of the best recorded examples of successful conservation. 100 years ago, there were less than 100 of these rhino in the wild. Today, there are an estimated 16,000 in protected areas across Africa.
And I am joined now by Markus Hofmeyr, who's the director of the Rhino Recovery Fund. Thanks so much for joining us, Markus. Welcome to DW. I hope you can hear me. Reintroducing 2,000 white rhinos into the wild. Tell us how significant this will be in securing the future of the species.
Thank you for allowing me to speak. And yes, it's a very significant event to take place. We've been very successful in recovering white rhino in South Africa and in Kenya, Namibia, and to some degree in Zimbabwe. This gives an opportunity now to augment all those numbers of rhinos that were lost with the poaching in the last decade. And then hopefully new populations can be established in their former range. And this is a wonderful opportunity to actually be able to do that. It is the best outcome for these rhinos, and we will be able to catapult rhino recovery into the future.
Markus, I presume this isn't the easiest of things to implement. I mean, what challenges are you expecting in this whole process?
Well, I mean, you have to contain a very wild animal in a small container and then move them over the long distances. So you've got all those physical restraints that you have to do. You've got the logistics of getting them safely to the new area that can be thousands of kilometers away. So the planning to do this is actually critical to make sure that the rhinos get to the new area safely. We are expecting some risk in this whole operation, but if we look back in 10 years' time, I think we'll all be grateful that this was an opportunity that was presented now. Thank you.
If we look back, I mean, a century ago, there were less than 100 of these rhinos in the wild. Today, an estimated 16,000 across Africa. I mean, it's a really fantastic success story. Does it set an example for protecting other endangered species?
Yeah, 100%. Now, rhinos are very vulnerable species. They've evolved to a point where they don't have natural predators. So humans with their weapons are able to kill every last one of them, like we saw in many of the range countries. So being able to recover a species that's so vulnerable through good law enforcement, good protected area management, and now being able to put them back into all of their former range actually is a very good example of good protection of an endangered species. And as was mentioned before, that the success of rhinos, to protect them, you have to be able to have safe landscapes. So not only rhinos will benefit, but all the other species that live in that landscape as well. So it's a very good proxy for successful conservation outcomes. So I'm very excited and very hopeful for the future for rhino recovery.
Markus Hofmeyr, Director of the Rhino Recovery Fund, thank you so much for speaking to us, and all the very best with everything that you're planning.
Thank you.
And I'm joined now by Dianne Hawker, who filed that report for us. What a brilliant story. I mean, 2,000 rhinos going to be released over the next 10 years. Can you tell us more about how this is actually going to happen? How is it going to be made reality?
Well, Anya, the organization African Parks actually has different parks across the African continent. It works in conjunction with various governments. So they are located in 12 different African countries. And in terms of the amount of space that they already have available, they have an estimated 20 million hectares of land that they help to oversee in different conservation areas. So their first port of call will be to look at some of those areas to see where the rhino would be best suited to be relocated. And then they will also communicate with other private conservation agencies which might have smaller properties, and then discuss arrangements of moving the rhino to these areas. In the report, I listed a number of countries, but there are actually so many more countries that they work with, 12 in total. So there are a number of opportunities that they have in existence already. And of course, some people and some organizations have already expressed interest in getting some of the animals onto their private conservation properties over the next few years.
OK. It is expensive, though, isn't it? I mean, we heard in your report that transporting each rhino can cost more than $50,000 US. So how is all of this going to be financed?
Well, there's of course different conservation considerations when it comes to moving the rhino to different parts of the continent. When they're moving the rhino locally, the cost will be quite small because they can consider using land transport. When it comes to moving them across borders, they have to consider things like permits. They have to consider things like vaccination for diseases that might be prevalent in other countries but not prevalent where the rhinos have been living thus far. And then there's the actual transportation. One of the things that the group mentioned to me is that when moving some rhino, they have to get very large aircraft, and that ends up being quite an expensive cost. When it comes to the funding, some of the things that they will be looking at is cooperation with the governments where the animals are expected to go. African Parks itself does run a number of parks and therefore gets quite a lot of money, either through donations as well as tourism fees that it gets from those parks. So it has luckily already got an existing structure which they will then have to amend to move these rhino, and that's also part of the reason why they've chosen to stagger it over that period so that they can ensure that they have enough funding over time to be able to move all these animals.
Dianne Hawker, DW's Dianne Hawker, thank you so much for bringing us up to date there on that wonderful story. Thank you.
I'd like to now welcome Johannes Vogel, Director of the Natural History Museum of Berlin. Johannes, rewilding 2,000 white rhinos, how crucial is that single initiative to secure the future of the species?
I think it's absolutely amazing what can be done today. That we brought back the Southern White Rhino from the brink to now 16,000 species, and now having this really audacious and courageous plan to distribute this magnificent species that once roamed all over Africa back to its natural range. It's really encouraging.
As you look forward, what are the challenges you anticipate to ensure the successful rewilding of rhinos to protected areas across Africa?
More and more, unfortunately, we see this conflict between man and nature, and it's now playing out in our birthplace, in man's birthplace, Africa. where encroachment for land, for natural resources, for water, but also, unfortunately, poaching for hocus pocus medicine in East Asia and regions is really threatening this magnificent species. They do not have these medicinal properties that are being assigned to them, but, you know, belief is stronger than facts quite often, and the rhino is being killed for that magic.
A striking point in that report, the fact that a century ago, there were less than 100 of these wild rhinos, compared to an estimated 16,000 across Africa's protected areas today. I imagine that gives you and conservationists real hope as it relates to other endangered species. Or is there something unique about white rhinos we simply can't project onto other species?
No, it shows how omnipotent we are, that man can potentially do what they want to do. They can drive a species to extinction. They can resurrect it and use it to rewild and restore ecosystems. So in the end, it is not, it's up to us. And we need to make the decisions what type of world we and our children want to live with in. And for me, it is absolutely clear I want a biodiverse, a nature-rich world, because if we believe it or not, it's this nature that feeds us, gives us clean air and waters us. And rhino is part of that complete and whole world that supports our good life.
Johannes Vogel, director of the Natural History Museum of Berlin. Many thanks to you.
Michael.